Here are the Beatles. Here are the Beatles.
Starting in January '68, there was the announcement that they were going to go to India. Apple was setting up at the beginning of the year as well. Harrison had just started his solo work out in Bombay, so there's a lot going on for the Beatles. It was not an unusual period, but I think the turning point was going to Rishikesh. And the whole year for them was, contradictions, but they went to Rishikesh and produced probably some of the best material they'd ever written.
We've always done a lot of work and we've always had very little time, free time. So the meditation helps us because we can do more work in less time, get more free time to relax.
Do you, sir, propose to play any active part in the propagation of transcendental meditation?
We'll do everything we can, anything that's possible. Everything we can. And we might be able to do all that.
It was actually George Harrison's wife, Patty, who had heard that Maharishi was coming to town. And she said we should all go. And I was personally not in a good place. I think, just overdoing it in the 60s. So I was just not very sort of centered.
Did you enjoy the trip over to India?
Yes, the journey was terrible, but the trip was all right. Yeah.
Did you think this man's on the level?
I don't know what level he's on, but
He's on the
we
level.
had a nice holiday in India and came back rested to play businessman.
You have this thing there, apparently they were splitting up, they weren't getting on, and yet they come back with a wealth of material.
Mr. Lennon, can you tell us what it is you're wearing, that button and those...
Well, it's just a white button.
The White Album, I wanted to pare that down and issue just one single album with the best stuff from it, but they insisted on putting down all the songs that they'd thought of while they were away in India.
I love the White Album. We ended up being more of a band again, and that's what I always love. I love being in a band.
This body of work, the White Album, was different from, say, Sgt. Pepper's because it did become a little bit more personal. This is my song, and how are we going to treat it, lads?
The songs, I think, that's a surprise to some people because I think a lot of people expected another step from Sgt. Pepper.
Well, it is another step, but it's not necessarily in the way people expected.
What I was going for was to forget about Sgt. Pepper and just get back to basic music.
And some of the songs I thought were fairly trite. Some of them were very good, but I thought that if we distilled it, we could have had a really super album.
Using Hammond and Lowry organ and piano.
No, but we thought if we're going to have an ending, for them to go out on. So a very screamy voice, you have to say.
I think this is where the confusion comes. They were working separately. Your dad was in and out, having to wait around.
I think the difference is actually someone like Sgt. Pepper has a blueprint, and I think their albums had a blueprint of sound, and they would go in and they would go, okay, my dad was the architect, and he would go, okay, listen, chaps, what we're going to do here is this, and they would come in. The White Album, they knew they were building something. They did it from brick by brick all the way up.
I think it's a fine little album. I think the fact that it's got so much on it is one of the things that's cool about it.
They were taking more control of their own songs than they'd done before. It was more solo-ish.
Can we just talk about this particular track? Because it's a...
Back in the USSR?
Yeah, it's a wild rocking thing.
Yeah. That's a track which... It just sort of, came... It Chuck Berry once did a song called Back in the USA, which is very American, very Chuck Berry, very sort of... he was serving in the army, and when I get back home, I'm going to kiss the ground. And, I just can't wait to get back to the States. And it's a very American sort of thing, I've always thought. So this one is like about, in my mind, it's just about a spy sort of who's been in America a long, long time, Some fella who's been in America a long time. And he picks up and he's very American. But he gets back to USSR,
Anyway, Happiness is a Warm Gun, as I've said many, many times, was from the cover of a gun magazine which George Martin had in the studio when we were making a double album. And it had Happiness is a Warm Gun on the cover. And on the cover it had a picture of a gun that had just been shot, was smoking,
John took that and uses that as a chord.
Yeah.
And the rest of the words I think they're great words. It's a poem. The poem when it finishes off, happens as a warm gun. Yes, it is.
The first half, let's go, she's not a girl who misses much. And these are all different segments of songs, and I just wove them all together, different songs, stuck them all in one piece and made like a little miniature, instead of an album collage like Pepper, this was all done in the one song. And it went through the different styles of rock, and it also was about a gun, not about heroin or anything. And those days I had no idea about heroin. I'd never seen it.
I was sitting on the roof in India. John and I were sitting around just playing guitar. And originally it was Rocky's Sassoon. And then we started making up the words, they came very quickly. And eventually I changed it from Sassoon to Raccoon. These kind of things, you can't really talk about how they come, because they just come into your head,
There was a girl there who was called Prudence Farrow, and she was Mia Farrow's sister.
Marici set it up so that the people who lived in close proximity to each other, 3 or 4 of them, would look after each other. And in my case, I was divided into a group of 3. We were called course buddies. And my course buddies were John and George.
The word got out that she was in her chalet and wouldn't come out.
I was doing intense meditation, and I had a lot of stress. So there was a period there where it was overwhelming for me. And John saw that. Donovan taught John how to do this special picking that actually comes from the gypsies, and he learned it in Europe when he traveled with the gypsies when he was very young.
One day John said, "How do you do that?" And I said to John, "I'll teach you. But it'll take a few days." He said, "I've got time down here in the jungle." And so he did. And we sat down, and John learned it in 2 days. I took 3.
And he showed it to John, and the first time John ever uses it and that it really starts to be known is in the song Dear Prudence.
And John wrote Dear Prudence.
So we all sort of wanted to go over, and John was playing and singing this to her.
Started recording at 5 o'clock, and we said, well, we'll just do a backing track, we'll make up a backing track. And then we came back, because we didn't have time for anything else, and so we just recorded this backing. Then we went back to the studio again, and then made up some words to go with it all, which were, they say it's your birthday, well, it's my birthday too. So this song was just made up in an evening. We hadn't ever thought of it before then, and it's one of my favourites, because of that. I think it works, because it's a good one to dance to. Like a big long drum break, but just because instead of, normally we might have sort of 4 bars of drums, but with this we just keep it going, we all like to hear just drums plodding on. So no more explanation.
McCartney wouldn't sit down. He didn't want to learn sitting. He was walking around with his guitar. And his particular picking, when he learned it, was completely different. A very, very unusual way he was using the guitar picking, and he got Blackbird.
It's simple in concept because you couldn't think of anything else to put on it. But I don't think it needs it, this one. It's just, there's nothing to the song. It is just one of those, pick it and sing it, and that's it. The only point where we're thinking of putting anything on it is where it comes back in at the end. So it stops and then it comes back in. But instead of putting any backing on it, we put a blackbird on it. So there's a blackbird singing at the very end.
I wrote it at my mother's house in the north of England. I just had my guitar, and when my guitar gently weeps, I think was typical of that. I just opened a book that was around. I just opened it, and the first thing I looked at became the song, and it was something about gently weeps. And then from that, the whole thought started going, and I just wrote the song then, just closed the book again, and I had the idea. I think, Eric Clapton played guitar on that. I think some people wrote letters to me saying, you've got a really good blues feel where you play that guitar. And we didn't publicise it, but we didn't keep it a secret. No. Eric's sort of a good friend of mine, and I really dig him as a guitarist and as a guy.
George wasn't so interested in the picking. He liked the chord structures because he was a budding songwriter under the great shadow of John and Paul, which is quite a big shadow. But he was moving into songwriting himself, and he wrote that beautiful While My Guitar Gently Weeps from the A minor, G, F sharp, F, and E.
You know, we were trying to do the song and it wasn't happening. You know, they weren't taking it serious. I went home that night and I just thought, well, that's a shame because I know this song's pretty good. And then the next day I was driving into London with Eric. I said, hey, what are you doing? Why don't you come to the studio and, play on this song for me? And he says, oh, no, I can't do that. You know, nobody's ever played on a Beatles record, and, the others wouldn't like that. And I said, well, odd luck, it's my song, and I'd like you to play on it.
We used to go to the clubs, drink, dance, maybe a little food. And there was a friend of mine who I befriended in the clubs. He was an African guy. He was called Jimmy Scott. And, we would jive together, just, hey, man, what's going on here? And he used to say, obladi, oblada, life goes on, brah. And I just loved this. And I would go, obladi, Jimmy, And he had a few other sayings. Nothing's too much, just out of sight.
Revolution, which was that distorted guitar sound, right? So he said to me, I want a great guitar sound and, you'll have to bloody well do it, right? So out of anger, what I did, I overloaded one mic amp because they're tube mics in those desks, and came out of that mic amp, which was completely overloaded, went into another mic amp and overloaded that one. And then just lifted the fader and said, is that what you bloody want, Because it was that sound which everyone loves.
Number 2 is the single because the other boys didn't like number 1. They said it wasn't fast enough, so I made it fast. And number 9 is an abstract picture of revolution. I had a lot of loops, tape loops, which is just a circle of tape. If people who don't understand it, it repeats itself over and over. Had about 10 of them on different mono machines, all spinning at once with pencils and things holding them. And I just played it sort of live into another tape and just brought them in on faders like you do as a DJ, and brought them in like that. And it was accidental in that way. I think I did it twice maybe, and the second one was the take. There was a lot of things that was actually stuff that Maharishi had said, like that song, come on, come on, it's such a joy, whatever that song. Everybody got something to hide except for me and my monkey. All of it, apart from the bit about the monkey, that was just what Maharishi used to always say,
Anyway, Helter Skelter, that came about just because I'd read a review of a record where it said, and this group, it was about some group, I can't remember, saying, and this group really goes wild, and they just, there's like echo on everything, they're screaming their heads off. And I just remember thinking, it'd be great to do one like that. The pity they've done it, must be great, really screaming record. And then I heard their record, and it was quite straight, and it was very sophisticated. It wasn't rough and screaming and tape echo at all. So I thought, we'll do one like that then. And I had this song called Helter Skelter, which is just a ridiculous song. So we did it like that because I like noise.
The Walls of Paul. At that time, still in my love cloud with Yoko, I thought, well, I'll just say something nice to Paul, that it's all right, and you did a good job over these few years holding us together, and he was trying to organise the group and that, and do the music and be an individual artist and all that. So I wanted to say something to it, and I did it for that reason. I thought, well, you can have it, I've got Yoko, and thank you, you can have the credit.
My dad's always sort of played fruity old songs like that, and I like them. I like the melody of old songs, and so I would quite like to have been sort of a 1920s writer, because I like that thing, the top hat and tails and sort of coming onto this kind of number. I like that thing, but so this is just me doing it and pretending I'm living in 1925.
That's about Maharishi. I copped out and wouldn't write Maharishi. What have you done? You made a fool of everyone.
When did you realise that he was making a fool of you?
I don't know. I just sort of saw him,
And there was a sense of anger there, and we never quite figured out why until a few weeks later, certain things started to come out in the press about what had happened in India with the Maharishi and all the rest of it, And so also, because they're forming the Apple company at that time, there's a lot of business problems happening, I guess.
I like most kinds of music, so that I haven't got a bag, as they say, except the big black one in the hall outside. And this, this Obladi, Oblada, and USSR, and Martha, and that, like are 3 different songs altogether. In fact, all of mine are on the LP. But I can't really say anything about that. I'm pretty diverse.
It really happened before Sgt. Pepper. They were going on tour. They played Candlestick Park, and they were going on tour, and but with the White Album, they didn't play live ever, apart from in the studios. And so therefore they indulged themselves.
They were gradually, like John was in number 3 studio and Harrison was in number 1 studio and Paul was in number 2 studio. The maintenance engineers were doing some of the engineering. And it came to a head, and it was on a Tuesday, and I said to George Martin, I said, look, I can't take this anymore, and I'm going to leave.
I'm doing a tune, and then some words come into my head, and these happen to be Mark and my day, although I spend days in conversation. It doesn't mean anything, but those just happen to come into my head. So that's what this song's about. So it is about my dog.
The second one, Ringo's first song that we're working on this very moment.
Exactly, he composed it himself.
He composed it himself in a fit of lethargy.
And what do you think about it?
I think it's the most wonderful thing I've ever heard since Nielsen's River Deep and Mountain Dew.
Well, that's about 30 seconds worth.
And I'm sure I pissed Ringo off when he couldn't quite get the drums to USSR, and I sort of sat in. I'm actually still very aware of that.
I quit the band in '67 on the White Album because I was just, I don't know, in some emotional state where I honestly felt that I wasn't playing well.
It's a very weird thing to know you can do a thing that someone else is having trouble with, because one, you make it very simple, but just going down and doing it and just bluffing right through it and thinking, the hell, at least I'm helping. But obviously the paranoia comes in is, but I'm going to show him up. And I was very sensitive to that. I still am. I remember sort of hours sitting around thinking, should I say anything?
You know, there's that famous old saying, you always hurt the one you love. And we all love each other, and we all know that, but we still sort of hurt each other occasionally, where we just misunderstand each other. And we go off, and it builds up to something bigger than it ever was. And then we have to come down to it and get it over with, sort it out.
Saw a lot of the reviews and so on. Some people called it the best thing since Sgt. Pepper. Other people panned it. It was such a wide sort of variety. How do you feel about it now?
Well, I think in a way it was a mistake doing 4 sides, because first of all, it's too big for people to really get into it, for reviewers and also the public. Maybe now people have bought it, and if they've really listened to it for years or since it was out, then they'll have their own favourites. And there's a couple of things that we could have done without on the album.
I think it was an album which could have been made a fantastically good album if it had been compressed a bit and condensed.
There was a lot of ego in that band, and there was a lot of songs that should have just maybe been elbowed or made into B-sides.
And a journalist said to me, I read that I Will was just Paul on his own, a solo. So I went, yeah, it wasn't. And he goes, no, but I read it was. I went, who are the other 2 guys? I went, well, that's John Lennon and then Ringo Starr, and having a laugh in the studios. But I read that it wasn't. I was like, well, what can I say? And as Paul says to me, because there was only 4 of them and they can't remember it.
Just completely different things, completely different feelings, and there's a great variety in this LP. Because in our things, in everything we do, we just haven't got one bag, the Beatles.
Maybe if we'd have made it just compact, 14 songs, say.
Which tracks do you think of in particular?
Things, but then again, it's only my personal thing.
Sure.
Because in a way, Revolution number 9 was all right, but it wasn't particularly like Beatle.
A lot of people put the album down purely because of that track.
Yeah, but then again, it has good points, because Revolution number 9 worked very well in the context of all those different songs. I mean, that was the great thing about it, that if people spent enough time listening to it, then there was all different types of music and types of songs.
See, Paul was always upset about the White Album. He never liked it, because on that one, I did my music, he did his, and George did his virtually. And A, he didn't like George having so many tracks. B, he wanted it to more be a group thing, which really means more Paul on it, on the tape,
Do you see the Beatles going on like they are at the moment for a long time in the future, or do you see a split very soon?
It depends what you mean as a split. I mean, we split...
Go your separate ways. And
Completely, no, we'll never go... Oh, I can't say never, but I mean, we won't go our separate ways after this album. And we'll always be tied up with each other in some way. all I'm doing, I'm acting out the part of Beetle George, and we're all acting out our own parts. And the world is a stage, and the people are the players. Shakespeare said that.
Was there, like, when we're talking about tension again and creative tension and how even if it's a pain in the ass, it can be useful?
Yeah.
Are there any particular albums that you?
White album.
The White album. I was gonna
The
say.
tension album. We were all in the middle of the sort of psychedelic thing, or just coming out of it, or whatever. But it was weird, I mean, there was a lot of friction during that album.
And when I hold you in my arms,